Hello everybody, and welcome back to Spacedock. I'm Joanna, and this week I'll be taking you through all of the cool new and returning ships seen in Season 3 of Star Trek Picard. I know it's been a couple of weeks since the last episode aired, but just in case you're behind on watching it, there will be major spoilers to follow. I'm going to start out by going over the various Star Trek Online ships that featured in the big fleet shots, and which are pretty much all revamps of or inspired by older designs. The first of these is the Reliant class, which is an update on the venerable Miranda class. It remains to be seen whether these actually are just Mirandas on the inside, following Starfleet's new emphasis on refits after Mars got torched, or if they're merely inspired by it. It's a pretty nice design, though a bit busy with all the paint and techie parts on the squared off aft section of the hull. The forward sweep through the centre of the hull leading into the nose cutout is very nice though. Next up is the Gagarin class, an updated version of the Shepard class seen in Discovery Season 1, and both of these have a nice overall layout. A big flat ship that still manages to fit in a deflector on the underside. But between the paint job and insets and multiple pylons, it's a bit too busy again. The nacelles are neat though, with the gap running down their length. The Sutherland is a very nice looking update on the classic Nebula, and I think actually improves upon that ship by adjusting the pylons to flow better, as the Nebula's ones are all squished up under the saucer. Despite that, the Sutherland still has that slight sense of jank about it that the original had, but that's part of the charm. Sticking with the Galaxy class family, we have the Ross class, a melding of the Galaxy and Sovereign, and one of the only ships besides the Sovi to have an amber glowing deflector, which I always loved. Pretty nice design, though has a few oddly shaped parts here and there like the backwards swept pylons. One of the more major STO ships added was the Pathfinder, an Intrepid-inspired design which perfectly fits the Voyager B, and leaves the A open for Prodigy to introduce. I love the enormous technical element that is the deflector embedded within the saucer, but overall the ship looks a bit fat due to its melded hull. Glad to see it included in canon though, even more so as a hero ship successor. Now we get into the more peculiar STO inclusions that I was not expecting, first of which is the recoloured Ilachi ship that was used as a shuttlecraft by the Shrike crew. Next up is the Edison class, which I was very surprised to find out was in amongst the big fleet shots. This was based on the Hoover class from Discovery Season 1, and I was actually wondering if these were the ships that appeared in the short trek about the attack on Mars, but alas that was instead a Magi class. The Edison is certainly an interesting design, as is the Hoover, as it goes for a Nebula-esque layout but even more vertically stacked. It also has a very unique looking deflector dish which I think looks really cool. Lastly, for background STO ships is the Elita class, which is a pretty ugly descendant of the Akira. This was another ship I was very surprised to find out about because of just how odd it looks, especially as many Akiras are also still kicking around and were even highlighted in Season 2. There was also a number of returning legacy designs filling out the big fleet shots, such as the Steamrunner and Nova classes, last seen in Season 2 as Confederation of Earth ships. Also from Season 2 were the Sagan and Excelsior II classes, as well as the Inquiry from Season 1. There's also some Lunars hanging around, as well as Akiras and Sovereigns, meaning this season had every ship type introduced in First Contact, except for the poor Norway class, forgotten once again. Moving swiftly on, we head to Aethon Prime to Commodore LaForge's Fleet Museum. The highlights here are of course the various hero ships from throughout the years. The Bounty, the Defiant, the Voyager, the two Enterprises. It's very nice to see the actual NX-01 refit in the flesh as it were, which is fantastic because the refit is a genius way of updating the original NX to the Starfleet standard design, and actually somewhat ties in to another canonized STO ship, the USS Pioneer, which has a somewhat similar layout to the NX. It's also in the original TOS stylings, as is the USS New Jersey, which is a neat little thing. And yes, the Connie from that era looks different to the Discovery or Strange New Worlds versions of it, but that doesn't matter, both look great! Other museum highlights for me are the USS Argo, the return of the massively underutilized Sabre class after 20 years. Like, come on! It just looks so good, and now it's going to be stuck never being used as the franchise has moved on beyond it. There's also a pair of Akiras, with one being named in tribute for Annie Wershing, the actress who played the alternative timeline Borg Queen in Season 2, who passed away earlier this year. There's also the museum itself, which is actually the venerable Spacedock from Earth, moved by tug, somehow, to its new home. This is an utterly timeless design that fits into any era you want to drop it into, making it perfect for its new role, where it also serves as a museum piece, much like a Galactica. I bet there's more ships inside of it as well, such as Uhura's Leon de Grance, which had a placard at the Academy saying it was at the museum. Probert Station is the big, shiny new Spacedock, which takes a lot of design cues from the original to the point where it may seem like it is the original one, just upgraded and expanded. That's certainly what I thought at first. I'm not entirely sure I like this one as much as the original though. It's gone a little bit too hard on the pointy up, pointy down elements for my tastes, as they break up the clean shape of the main core a tad too much. It's by no means bad though, but the original Starbase 1 is just so iconic, and a very high bar to reach. Seeing inside it was a treat though. I always love those Spacedock interior shots, because it gives artists an excuse to show spaceships in a new light. Literally. There's even atmospheric haze in there, which makes things look really cool thanks to giving some depth and really making ships look huge. Oh yeah, and the station is an absolute beast in combat, able to take the combined firepower of the entire fleet at once by itself. How badass is that? Seems like it's now the central focus point of Earth's defences, and good lord it took a beating. It's easily repaired too, only a year later and it was back up and running, good as new. And now we come to the brand new ships of the season, the hero ships, the main stuff, right after the Type 14 long-range shuttle, which is a shuttle that is long-ranged and has nacelles that match the era. It also has a rarely seen docking port. Good job Starfleet engineers who designed the Type 14 and who read the script for the episode that said it had to dock with the Helios. The Helios. A Phoenix class, somewhat analogous to the Danube or the Raven, in that it's a small, long-distance transport ship that's bigger than a shuttle but isn't quite a full-on vessel. As seen in the show with how Beverly and Jack use it, the Phoenix was designed for rapid response things like medical supplies, and seems to be based on a John Eves concept from a decade ago. Pretty neat little ship with echoes of the original NX, and it has a bit of a tired workhorse vibe to it, which is fitting. Another semi-new ship for the season is the Echelon class, which is really just a Sagan class with 2 nacelles rather than 4. It's a bit of a strange design due to that, making it essentially just a less capable but easier and faster to build Sagan. Or perhaps it's the other way around in universe, and the Sagan is an updated and more capable Echelon. Either way, nothing too exciting going on here. Now we get into the really cool stuff, starting with the Duderstadt class, designed by Bel Kraus and represented in the show by the faceless Intrepid. And from every angle except side on, this is a really beautiful ship. The circular saucer looks gorgeous and flows into the engineering section directly behind it, with relatively flat pylons for its nacelles and culminating in the impulse drive on the very back. If that were the entire craft, it may very well be the best looking new Federation design in the show, but it's not. Unfortunately, there's a weird growth on the underside that somewhat resembles the secondary hull of more traditional Starfleet ships, especially from the front or back. But it sprouts from the rear of the vessel and protrudes forward in a way that is just weird and really spoils the side profile. I do like that it's meant to be a long-range sensor pod with an extra aft-facing sensor, in a similar vein to the mission pods of the Nebula and the Sutherland, but yeesh, it just looks so peculiar. Despite that, it's still a great-looking ship, especially that shot of it rising up to face the Titan, made all the more scary by the fact that it's somewhat anonymous, as we never see the captain or crew of it. Next up would be the Shrike, but I already gave my thoughts on that ship over in this video. If you didn't watch that, here's a brief recap. Shrike, good. It was not the main antagonist behind what was going on though. For that, we have to go to Jupiter. The Borg Cube, once again returning to Star Trek and in truly spectacular fashion. While the regular cube was large, this thing seemed to be utterly vast, going so far as to have ample room inside it to fly around with a Galaxy class, which is pretty large by itself. However, if we look closely at the view screen data on the potential route through it, we can see that it's still just a regular 3 km across cube. So either the on-screen details are just wrong, or it's the usual special effects scaling shenanigans I talked about in a previous video. Being that big sure made it look great though, especially coming up out of the clouds. I was actually concerned it would be somewhere stupid like inside Jupiter all this time since the Battle of Sector 001, but Queenie was hanging out inside the depths of space somewhere and merely transwarped through to the inside of the Great Red Spot, likely to be within broadcast range? That puts a bit of a damper on her plan if she has to be that close to control people, but I suppose she could have built a much larger transmitter later on. Also, how spooky did the inside of the ship feel? The decrepit interior with the decayed drones and the sickly lighting was perfect. The same goes for the transmitter itself, with the more yellowy lighting and all the little sinewy cables on the sides. And now we get to the stars of the show, the Enterprises, beginning with the glorious arrival of the Odyssey class from Star Trek Online as the F. It's been over 2 decades since we last saw the E, and now we finally see her successor, even if it was for a vanishingly short time and at the very end of its life. And what a beauty the Odyssey class is, originating from a fan contest for STO, with the winning design by Adam Ely. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. It had its own long and illustrious history in STO, with its art being updated as time went on, with the most recent refresh by Thomas Marone being the version we see in the show, which isn't even in the game yet. It's a gorgeous ship, though to be honest I didn't really like it at first, as the saucer slopes off very heavily and the nacelles taper a bit too much, and I thought the gap in the neck was dumb. But it really grew on me, and now I think I may even prefer this over the Sovereign class. It's just got such a sense of grandeur about it. It's just so stately, more than worthy of being the flagship of the fleet. Yes, it's sad we likely won't see much, or any, of the adventures of the F, much like the C, but the Odyssey class itself is still kicking around, and I'm hopeful we'll see more of it in future. The second to last ship I'm talking about today is the hero ship of the season, the Titan A Constitution 3 class. This is another side of the Federation looking back for inspiration, along with all the revamped designs provided by Star Trek Online. The Titan is another Bill Krause design, based on his motion picture era Shangri-La class. In fact, it's barely even changed from the Shangri-La, with the main differences being the removal of the nose-mounted torpedo launcher, the switch to the Picard-style nacelles, and a general scaling up, which was certainly a bold choice, though not one I'm a particular fan of, because the Connie 3 is just weird. It's chunky in all the wrong places, the saucer cutouts don't work for me, it's got a humpback impulse engine, an undersized deflector, and the nacelles don't fit with the rest of the design. In general, I don't think the design really works with itself, that goes beyond its visuals. The lore for it says it's supposed to be a refit of Riker's Titan, which was an entirely different class of ship. There is concept art of how this could have happened, with Riker's old ship being a donor for components for its successor, as Starfleet now lacks a lot of raw materials and industrial equipment after the loss of Mars. May as well reuse and recycle the good components, right? The problem is that the show does not treat it this way, and strongly implies that it is the same ship that just got refit, which makes absolutely zero sense. It's not all negative though, as there is plenty I do like about it. It does look really great in motion and from certain angles, such as during the Spacedock sequence in the very first episode. Seeing the nacelles get opened up too was a really awesome little sequence, as was the evacuation hatch. It's always nice to get some physicality like that in Star Trek. The last thing to talk about regarding the Titan is the contentious issue of renaming it as the Enterprise G, which I'm not really sure about. I mean, sure, there is precedent for this, but that happened to ships that didn't really have stories of their own, unlike the Titan. Also, with the show ending on this note of passing the torch, and especially Shaw's comments about Seven doing things differently, it felt a bit like telling people to embrace the new side of Star Trek with a Titan is the future sort of thing. Ah well, onto the G we go I suppose, which does have some interesting potential, especially with Jack maybe not getting any respect from the crew because he's the son of 2 admirals who skipped through the academy and went straight to being on the bridge. And he was the voice in their heads telling them to kill people, you know, like Shaw's feelings towards Picard, except probably much worse. And last of all, the Enterprise D. It's not a new ship, but the grand old lady still deserves some attention, because we can all agree that it got done dirty in Generations. And why? The design is timeless. It's wonderfully futuristic with those curves and glowy bits. It really sells the big jump between the motion picture era and TNG. And it's not like it can't look good in a movie-esque format, because seeing Geordi's glorious restoration with the Syracuse star drive certainly proved that idea wrong. The scarring on the saucer, the subtly different hull colours between the 2 parts of the ship, just fantastic to see with modern CGI. It looked great in motion too. One particularly neat thing I liked was the way smoke and fire was pushed around the shield bubble. I just hope the D moving around like an oversized fighter doesn't set a new precedent for big ships moving like that though, because that was under truly exceptional circumstances. Star Trek has some deep ties to naval vessels, where big ships move like big ships, and I'd hate to see that go away. The amazing attention to detail also carried over onto the bridge set, which still looked great in widescreen format without the additions that Generations added. Really glad to see the old girl finally get the real send-off that it needed. You can support Spacedock by joining our Patreon, where you can get our Spacefighter design reference book. Alternatively, you can support us directly through YouTube by giving us super thanks or by becoming a channel member. Thanks to our supporters, and thank you for watching.